Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne. Welcome to Mama Paul's video podcast. Today is January the 7th, 2021, and I did a little basement diary a little prior to this, and I wanted to, what I'd like to do is I like to get in the habit of coming on down and maybe taking a look at yesterday's newspaper or today's newspaper and giving you my sort of summary of what I found were the most important things in the paper. Well, not necessarily the most important, but at least interesting from my perspective. Now, the paper of Thursday, January 6th, in spite of it being the anniversary of January 6th, for me, the paper had some really interesting stories in there. There was a story, my wife's maiden name was Padua, and the Padua was from a town in Italy called Padua, Padua. Now, we had made a trip to Europe many years ago, half a dozen years ago, and in it we drove past the town of Padua. We never stopped there. We were on a tour, and we were on a tour bus. We never stopped in the town. But interestingly, Padua is in the paper today. Norman Mailer, and Norman Mailer's new book was in the paper today. I have a connection with Norman Mailer in that I had seen him when I was going to Hunter College, and he was going to run for mayor of New York. And he showed up one afternoon giving a little talk. And William Ellinghaus, who oversaw the breakup of AT&T, was also in the paper the other day on January 6th. So I thought these were sort of fairly significant little stories that touched me directly. So the Padua story had to do with the fact that in this town of Padua, there are apparently, there's like a circle, a park, and they've got like over 100 Italian philosophers in this park, men, all men. One woman, she's way in the back of the park, but pretty much it's known for not having any women in it. And over the course of the years, a few of these statues have crumbled and fallen apart. So there's this effort right now to put some female philosophers on these pedestals in the park in Padua, Italy. And there's a little bit of a debate going on between whether they should, whether they're going to put females with the male philosophers, or they're going to have a separate park to put the female philosophers in. And it's got quite a debate going in the town of Padua. I thought that definitely struck home for me. There's my wife's town in the paper, a big debate about whether, and Diane is without a doubt one of the hardcore feminists. She has been a feminist since day one. Her mother was a Rosie the Riveter, and Diane was definitely a hardcore feminist. We first got married back in the 60s. There was no doubt in my mind that I was married to a feminist. Probably what attracted me to her in the first place. Norman Mailer, he's quite a character. Norman Mailer, known for being a pugnacious, he would box also. He was a boxer, and he was sort of obnoxious and an egomaniac, and he wrote a whole bunch of books. Very interesting writer. But apparently he has a book here where he talks about the growing partisan division in America, and he talked about this back in the 60s, and the possibility for violence as a result of this partisan divide in America. Well, Mailer also dated one of my main heroes. Gloria Steinem is a big heroine of mine, and she dated Mailer at one point. They had a couple of dates together. Gloria Steinem started off as a Playboy bunny in the job. She got the job in order to do an investigative report on them, which she did, and then is one of the giants in the women's liberation movement over the last half century. But anyway, she dated Mailer, and she wrote about him and what a jerk he was. And Mailer decided to run for mayor of New York. Well, in this article about him, Random House is not going to publish the book about him. And the day he was going to announce he was going to run for mayor of New York, he's at a party. He had 6 wives. And he stabbed his wife in the chest and in the back. She didn't die or anything, but she wound up in the hospital with some minor. He used a small penknife, and he stabbed her. It didn't say why he stabbed her. I had never heard this story. But I had seen him literally a day or two after that. I was in Hunter College going to night school, and Mailer came to give a talk in the auditorium. I went to the talk. And the most prominent thing about Mailer that I noticed was that he was pigeon-breasted. Now, he doesn't look that way in the picture. Does not look that way in the picture. Stands quite, oops, that way. He stands rather stately. But he was literally incredibly pigeon-chested. As he walked down the aisle, it was the most notable thing about his physical presence. And that's what stuck in my mind over the years. The reason, part of the reason they're not going to publish this particular book that was rewritten about Mailer is apparently he published an essay that was entitled My White Negro, one of his early essays. And with the woke culture we live in, I believe it was enough to push Random House over the edge and decline to publish that article. The other interesting one in the paper, this was the Obituary, William Ellinghaus. Now, this is the guy that oversaw the breakup of AT&T. He's dead at 99 years old. Well, this is one heck of an obituary for this guy. He started off his career working as a lineman in AT&T, worked his way up, eventually became one of the few executives who didn't have a college degree. And he wound up working on a board, and he was quite bright guy. And he wound up working on a board saving New York City from bankruptcy at one point while he was working with AT&T and while he was overseeing the breakup of AT&T. Well, we read this article here, and we find out that, well, the breakup of AT&T that happened, I was there when it started to happen. And I was fully aware of what was going on at AT&T. I was in New York City, and at one point, as I was getting promoted into management ranks, I wound up in the headquarters department. And quite a few years before the breakup actually happened, I was aware of the fact that the judge who was working on the case was on the payroll for AT&T. AT&T wanted to get broken up, because in the process of getting broken up, they also got deregulated. And the deregulation led to some other unintended consequences that they hadn't planned on. But the breakup itself was they were behind it. Now, it looked like they were pushing against it, but they weren't pushing against it at all. Interestingly, somebody gave me a book, they left this at work for me, called Broken Promises. And if I do a show about AT&T one of these days, which I've been threatening to do and I never seem to get around to, I'll talk about some of the other things that are going on with AT&T that are typical of what's going on with the corporations in America. Now, the last thing I'll finish up on, I'm at 8 minutes, the last thing I'll finish up on is Chris Hayes last night had an interesting show, and he was interviewing, I'm going to go watch this again. I'm going to watch this interview again. Well, we're all sitting here wondering, like, how does Trump have this hold on these congressmen and these senators? Okay, we know that there are people running around the country threatening poll workers and threatening people that are involved with the election process, and they're changing laws in Georgia and in Texas and Wisconsin and Michigan, and they're basically trying to, the democracy that we have, which wasn't exactly a terribly strong democracy to start with, and you can easily understand where this Make America Great Again BS came from, because the democracy itself, if I were to talk about the state of our democracy before Trump, I would be denigrating the state of the democracy, talking how weak it was, talking how the corporations are controlling the whole thing. Where is the voice of the people in the midst of this whole thing? It's pretty difficult to see. So in the midst of this, Trump comes along, and with all the flaws that are going on, he sort of zeroes in on these flaws within it, and then makes himself out to be the savior who's going to save us from them. Well, he's not going to save us from anything. In fact, he's worse than the flaws that were there to start with. But after the January 6th insurrection, finally he's lost the election. And 2 years before the election even happened, he was talking about how if he did lose, it would be impossible for him to have lost a legitimate election, so the election is going to be fixed if he loses. He was setting this whole thing up beforehand. The man lies every day. Every day he lied more than any other president in American history. The man's whole career is built on lying, cheating, and stealing. Therefore, what does he do? He projects his faults out to the rest of the world, and therefore it's stop the steal. Oh, the election was stolen from him. That's because he steals. So that's why he says what he says. And this group of people, they buy right into it. Well, after the January 6th, we thought, well, that should be it for him. Even Mitch McConnell it doesn't exactly have him on a pedestal after the January 6th insurrection. So it looked like Trump was going to be maybe gone, persona non grata. And we didn't hear about him through February, March, April. It wasn't until the end of May that he started to come back into the news. The end of May, the beginning of June, by the time we got into the summer, he starts to get back into the news again. So for 3 or 4 months, dead quiet. And then he starts to get back in. Well, he's back into the point now where the whole Republican Party, other than Dick Cheney and his daughter, seem to be the only 2 people within the Republican Party that are standing up to this guy. This is just absolutely mind-boggling. So you would say to yourself, what kind of a hold does he have to get this kind of loyalty? Well, on Chris Hayes' show, and he's the one who precedes Rachel. I watch Rachel every night. I don't always watch Chris Hayes, but my wife does. And Chris Hayes does quite a bit of really good investigative reporting also, but you can only watch so much in a day. The guy who was interviewing was talking about how representatives, senators, and their families have been threatened with physical violence. And this makes more sense than anything that I have heard. This has to be what's going on. Now, this is what you used to hear after 9/11, was how Dick Cheney was running around doing this type of thing. And now Trump and Trump's whole entourage of gangster businessmen around him seem to be doing a similar thing. I'm going to wrap it up right there. I'm going to try to keep things down to less than 15 minutes. I should probably try to practice doing smaller shows, but okay, so that's it for the night. Peace, patience, persistence, and we'll see you when I can next.